Well, to get more on this story now, we're going to cross live to investigative journalist David Hundeyin. Thanks for joining us on the program, David. There seems to be a conflict of interest here between the need to protect the U.S. domestic economy and preserve the dollar's status as the world's primary reserve currency. What do you think could be done to avoid the so-called Triffin dilemma when short-term policy contradicts this long-term international policy without crashing the global economy?
So I think, first of all, there needs to be some sort of pragmatism that comes into play. I think those who are in power in Washington right now are very ideologically driven, which I guess you could say is somewhat admirable. But the thing with people who are entirely ideologically driven is that they tend to cause a lot of damage in the short term. And I think that's what we're witnessing, or we're about to witness, because as you rightly said, there's an inherent contradiction in the American economic world order. It's a world order that is built on the internationalization of the US dollar. So it's a world order that needs this sort of structural inefficiency where the production takes place elsewhere, like in Asia and South America, and the consumption takes place in the US, fueled by an overvalued currency. That's the world order that the US consciously and knowingly built. So this idea that you're going to overturn the entire world economy overnight, then bring all the supposed manufacturing jobs back to America, many of which never existed in America in the first place. And then in the process of doing that, you're not taking into account the fact that it's not such a simple issue as merely building factories in the US. There's also the issue of the fact that the US labor market has been engineered to be in line with the sort of consumption-driven economy that the US is. So there's a popular quote from Steve Jobs, where he said that anyone who says that the reason that iPhones are made in China because of Chinese cheap labor doesn't understand what it is. That China stopped being a cheap labor country many years ago, and the reason why production is concentrated in China is because there's a glut of available skills. There's a skilled population available in large numbers there. He said that the engineers who tooled the iPhones, that if you were to have a meeting of those engineers in the US, you could barely fill up a room. You could fill 4 football stadiums of them in China. And that's why it's more efficient to produce in China. So that kind of economic inefficiency cannot be solved by merely imposing tariffs and slamming this top-down solution overnight that, hey, come produce in America, and somehow that fixes everything. That is not going to work. So Trump needs to be a lot more pragmatic and needs to be a lot more humble about understanding the true situation of the American economy, that despite the fact that it has the world's most valuable currency, that value is entirely notional. It's entirely artificial.
Well, would you say that Donald Trump is moving forward with these tariffs, understanding these risks that you just outlined, or is he going in blind?
That's a very difficult question to answer. I think that he, as an individual, might potentially be going in blind, but I don't think the people around him are blind people. I think he's surrounded by people who have enough real world nows to know what is going on. So I think there's a more ideological thing at play here. There's this idea that the US economy in the 21st and 22nd century will be driven by AI and automation. So basically all the production doesn't need to happen elsewhere anymore. You can bring back all the production to the US and get robots and AI to do it. But even if that were the case, for the sake of argument, that still doesn't explain what is then going to happen to 300 million Americans who would have effectively been rendered obsolete overnight. So again, I feel like there's a lot of ideological fire that you can sense coming from the likes of J.D. Vance. But again, you don't get the sense that there's a lot of long-term thinking that has gone into this.
Well, something that a lot of economists, of course, think about when they hear about protectionism, tariffs of over 100%, they think about the Great Depression. I mean, protectionism is understood by historians to be one of the main causes of that. Do you think that if this can go far enough to cause a sort of global recession on the level of the Great Depression, or maybe could China take a step to become the sort of heir to the throne of globalization and reap some economic rewards? What do you think?
I think it's more likely to be the second scenario. I definitely don't think there's going to be a 1939 style global crash. I think the global economy is just fundamentally different now because the economy that existed then had maybe two or three, poles. The global economy now is a lot more multipolar. So, you know, I believe the Chinese, I believe it was the Chinese foreign minister or the Chinese foreign ministry spokesperson made a statement a few days ago, which I thought was very telling. And it said something along the lines of, well, China has existed for more than 5,000 years. And for most of that time, there was no United States. So we'll be fine without the US. The world is much bigger than the US, which I thought was a very telling statement that gives us a sort of window into how the Chinese government is thinking of this, that they're not thinking of it as a crisis, they're thinking of it as an opportunity to fundamentally reshape the economic makeup of the entire world.
Well, going back to one of the things you mentioned when I asked about is Trump going into this blind or not, there are some officials in his administration that are at odds with this, of course. Elon Musk has publicly come to blows over this with one of Trump's trade advisors. So what do you think that says about the sort of unity of the Trump administration going into this and the sort of cohesion or lack thereof, rather, that we're having at the beginning of this sort of deployment of tariffs?
I think it goes to the heart of one of the basic contradictions at the heart of this sort of very right-wing ideas that some people have in the Western world. So while they agree that it's the sort of the God-given position of certain parts of the world to have some sort of economic supremacy, they can't agree on how this economic supremacy should be accomplished. So people like Elon Musk believe that the US and the West, by extension, has this God-given right to cherry pick talent from the rest of the world, and to basically cherry pick the rest of the world as they see fit. While the sort of J.D. Vance faction believes in a more isolationist idea, which comes from the same ecosystem of thinking, but it's kind of different. And that's the sort of ideological conflict that we're seeing. And we started seeing this actually even before Donald Trump's election, where on the issue of the so-called H-1B visa, for example, Elon Musk was a very public supporter of the H-1B visa program because he believes that that's essentially how the U.S. Maintains technological supremacy by raiding the best of talent from the rest of the world and basically putting them in, indentured servitude, for lack of a better term. Whereas the other faction within the right-wing ecosystem believe that, it's America first, and everything we have here is enough. We're the greatest country in the world. We don't necessarily even need to trade with anyone. We have the biggest market. We have the best and brightest of everything by default, which I think is a mistaken way of looking at the world. I think Elon Musk potentially has a more realistic way of looking at the world, which is not to say that I agree with it, but again, that's the inherent contradiction in this sort of very right-wing ideas that these people have, and it'll be very interesting to see how they resolve these contradictions.